All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AI Kubernetes Show, the podcast where we talk to some of the world's leading experts in the field of AI and Kubernetes, and we try and understand this landscape, this rapidly changing landscape around us. Today, I am very happy to be joined by Matt Barker, who is the CEO and founder of a company called BoltMCP and is a fixture in the Kubernetes space. Matt, it's great to have you here. Please introduce yourself and justify your existence. Why should our listeners pay attention to the rest of this podcast?
Hello, William. How are you? That was a very professional introduction
Thank you.
to the
Thanks.
podcast. I feel like it was quite US news anchorish. So, yeah, well done. That's really
And next we'll have weather.
Yeah, great to be here. Matt Barker, co-founder, CEO of BoltMCP. But as you rightly mentioned, I've spent 11 years now in the Kubernetes space. So, founded a company originally called JetStack, which was to help people to adopt containers and Kubernetes, and then tried to figure out what people hated about deploying cloud native infrastructure and essentially automated certificates in Kubernetes, which became a project called cert-manager. And that's probably what we're best known for. So essentially, that's the de facto way of doing certificate lifecycle management in Kubernetes. And since then, I went on.
Just sorry to interrupt, but I object when people use the term de facto because I think that's like 99% of the time that's pure marketing hyperbole. But in your case, cert-manager is the de facto standard. Like, I don't think there's anything that really competes with cert-manager at all. And probably, 99% of Kubernetes clusters out there have cert-manager installed on there.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that I'm not BSing. So thank you for that. But I mean, plenty of time left of the podcast to do that, I think. But yeah, it is. I mean, it's a relatively obviously small project, but it has a tremendous impact, and it's very valuable to a lot of people using it. I mean, it is downloaded now more than 3 million times a day. It's probably in 8 or 9 out of every 10 Kubernetes clusters that I see. And it's definitely part of the furniture to the point where we actually donated it to the CNCF back in 2020. And it's a graduated project like yours. And yeah, we're very proud of it. And it's kind of been the foundation upon which I built the last 5 to 6 years of my career, or no longer, even on
3 million. I mean, download counts, another vanity metric that I objected, but 3 million a day is like that's pretty amazing. Like I've seen projects out there that are touting, hey, we reached 5 million downloads total. Okay.
Do you notice I didn't use GitHub stars?
Yes. Yeah. Well, much appreciated.
Although I've got to say, maybe some of those downloads are mirrored, but they're genuine. It's a lot, put it that way. That's kind of my background. We were acquired by a company called Venafi that is best known for creating what they call the machine identity. What would you call it? Category with Gartner. Essentially, they kind of commercialized certificate lifecycle management, and then they were acquired by private equity, and then CyberArk, and then Palo Alto. And after cert-manager, I turned my attention to the world of identity, specifically an identity standard called SPIFFE, which was also created by the same guy that created Kubernetes, a guy called Joe Bader. It just feels like I just continue to just follow things that he does. But he clearly is pretty good at tech. So there are
a worse person to follow.
there are worse people to follow than him. And I essentially created a product at CyberArk called Secure Workload Access, which uses SPIFFE and the identity to actually secure access to other machines or workloads rather than using long-lived static secrets. Because I realized 10 years ago, developers hated certs because they always expired and they ended up killing applications. They also hate secrets because they get leaked and hackers start to use them to log in rather than hack in. So let's get rid of those. Ultimately, it turns out that product and SPIFFE itself is incredibly good for AI agents because you don't want AI agents to have easy access to secrets because they can use them, forward them, reuse them, leak them. And SPIFFE itself is having a moment, and that product, Secure Workload Access, went GA very recently. I worked on it for almost 2.5 years, and that's become the foundation now of CyberArk's and then ultimately Palo Alto's, because CyberArk got bought by Palo Alto's AI agent identity product. And that's what I was doing up until recently. That was very exciting because I got to speak to a lot of investment banks in New York that were looking at adopting agentic frameworks and looking to get into production with this. And they were essentially saying, we can't use long-lived secrets for this. We're going to have to use something like SPIFFE. So I got an amazing insight into the way that agents were being adopted. But, yeah, again, I couldn't help myself. I got too excited and quit the company and started again with a friend to create BoltMCP. And that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I've already got about 7 questions right off the bat. But one thing before we go into BoltMCP, because I want to understand, what you're doing there. You mentioned that developers didn't like secrets, or the investment banks didn't want these long-lived secrets because it's like an attack vector for agents or whatever, and therefore they were turning to SPIFFE. My understanding of SPIFFE was that SPIFFE is like a format for like kind of encoding your identity into a TLS certificate, into an X.509 certificate. So what's the relationship between that and long-lived secrets? Because a secret in the Kubernetes sense, and like the capital S secret sense, is just like it's just some type, right, that sits on your cluster, and like, yeah, it's base 64 encoded to prevent like accidentally catting it out or something. But like, how is that related to secret? Why would they see SPIFFE as an alternative to long-lived secrets?
It's a good question. And SPIFFE took me a long time to get my head around, honestly. But I guess the way that I think about it is, you remember the early days of cloud native and Kubernetes when developers would go and spin up a Kubernetes cluster and they'd build their cloud native infrastructure, and they would realize that they need an API key or a service account or a token or whatever it is. And so they'd spin up HashiCorp Vault open source and they'd start sticking them in there. But the problem is they were often run and managed by engineers or DevOps engineers or cloud native engineers. They weren't often managed or owned with the governance of the security teams or the identity teams. And so what you'd have is this sort of like sprawl of secrets because they just weren't particularly well managed. Nothing against DevOps and Kubernetes engineers,
Sure.
by the way, but they just often end up getting hard coded into code, or they end up on Slack or GitHub. They just end up being not controlled particularly well, to the point where actually before AI agents, we already had a big problem with this. So there's a company called GitGuardian that does a state of secret sprawl report, and they analyzed the number of leaked secrets that they found on GitHub, and they found 22 million secrets, or like passwords or
That's
whatever they are.
secrets in like the generic sense of like any kind
Yeah,
of like access,
yeah,
authorization.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly. And that was up from 17 million the year before. So there's 25% growth in the number of leaked secrets or access tokens or keys on GitHub. And that's a problem because they don't get rotated or updated or shut down. They just sort of live there and wait for some hacker to go and find them and then figure out a way inside your company. And that led to all sorts of issues and hacks over the years. I think Uber's obviously a very well known one. Um, and so essentially I was like, okay, how do we actually, and actually the process of actually putting secrets into a HashiCorp Vault and managing them and rotating them and making sure that they belong to the right person or only used by a certain system at the right time is just very challenging. So I was thinking, well, you could, essentially, like you say yourself, I mean, we have a foundation of PKI with X509 certs. Why don't we just use that as a mechanism to go and apply an identity to a workload, and then essentially just use a short-lived cryptographically backed X509 like certificate with this sort of what we call as SPIFFE. Well, and there's a lot to it, a SPIFFE verifiable identity document, and just use that very short-lived identity based on that TLS like PKI backing, and just use that sort of short-lived identity to go and let that workload go and speak to another resource or another workload for the moment that it needs it, and then just get rid of it, rather than having to kind of like think about having a long-lived secret that's specifically related to that workload trying to speak to that resource that you put in a secret store somewhere else. It's a little bit of like a hack almost. It's like, what's the point when you've already got PKI? No one's going to get rid of PKI, so you may as well use that. So I set out with this idea of trying to essentially get rid of secrets entirely by just building on a foundation of PKI. And it just so turns out that Google had the same problem. And the problem was because they realized through the Snowden leaks that the government was inside their system and they were sending data around in clear text. And they were, a lot of people used to think about their organization as a perimeter or a firewall, and so they
Yep.
used to
Yep.
protect the perimeter. They didn't used to protect the actual workloads that were running inside the perimeter because they just assumed that no one would get inside that perimeter. But as soon as Google realized that someone was inside that perimeter, they realized they had to start thinking about securing their workloads or the individual pieces of software in the same way that they thought about protecting them on the outside. And essentially, that's where SPIFFE came from because it was just the most foundational, best way of securing workloads when they realize that they're not going to get rid of PKI. So you may as well build on that as a foundation.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a very familiar story to me, obviously, because one of the big use cases for Linkerd is mutual TLS, and for the exact same reason. Why are we encrypting data in between pods? In our environment, if like we have this really fancy firewall on the outside, well, it's because the fancy firewall on the outside is not the modern vehicle for security, because like there's lots of ways of avoiding that, and you can actually automate a lot of a lot of what used to be the hard part with things like Linkerd and or SPIFFE.
But
Okay,
I would
so
say though
yeah,
that SPIFFE obviously has been around for a long time and it is in production. I think it's well known in production at Uber and TikTok Bike Dance and Bloomberg and a bunch of others. But it's very hard to implement SPIFFE retroactively because you need to go and actually make the application SPIFFE aware. What's changed is that since people have realized that it's very easy for agents to go and leak secrets, they need a way to run AI agents without using them, ideally. And the great thing is that AI agents are all greenfield, and so that we have an opportunity now to do things right from the ground up. And I think that's why, just to answer your original question, why a lot of companies are very interested now in SPIFFE and why SPIFFE is kind of having a moment because there's this new opportunity to go and solve a problem that is very obvious thanks to all the issues that we've seen with the Grafana and the Cell and the Trivia attacks, but apply SPIFFE to these AI agents just to give you a bit more confidence that you're not going to end up potentially like leaking secrets that can get used against you.
yeah, great. Okay, so what I'm hearing from you, tell me if this is right, is we already kind of knew that this was a problem before. The problem of workload identity in general and secrets management, and how do we do that in a world where even before AI, like developers would continually leak secrets, not because they're evil, but because things are moving fast and they're being ultimately judged on like how rapidly can we advance the business, and sometimes this stuff gets complicated. Okay, so we already had that problem, but now with the rise of agentic and AI, that problem is it's compounded because now we have these things in our system that are, I guess, non-deterministic and like who knows, and maybe have some new and interesting new attack vectors like prompt injection. You've got that, and then B, you have a lot, because a lot of this is greenfield. We actually have an opportunity to do this kind of at the framework level, so we don't have as much friction as when we tried to apply
Exactly.
these techniques to like
Yeah.
existing code that have been around for
Yeah.
20 to 30 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
was I was quite I was quite I was quite I was quite taken aback at how much people actually know about SPIFFE, amongst my circles. It's just that no one's been interested in doing anything about it because trying to convince the CISO to go and retroactively apply
Yeah.
apply all these like workloads and services and give us SPIFFE identities has never really been highest on the priority list. AI agents come along and like we already had the non-human identity problem. It's like okay, now this is a time to go and actually properly explore it. So it's quite refreshing to me to see actually how many people already know about it and they knew it was going to solve a problem, but now like they get an opportunity to actually go and embrace it and test it and use it. And as you say, there was a problem there was already well understood and known. You're actually 40% more likely to go and leak a secret with AI generated code. Not only because it's harder to
Ah,
see what's going on in the background, but also think about the number of people now that are playing with Replit and Lovable and creating all these vibe coded like apps. A business person, do they know what a secret is? I mean, even we had to have a conversation to sort of clarify what it means. Like, does your average like Joe in an organization who's potentially using Lovable to create some front end application know what's going on in the back end and what it means to have an API key and how it gets used ultimately? Probably not. So I think the problem is only going to get worse. And if you see that, for example, when OpenClaw was used to create Maltbook, and the founder of Maltbook said, "Oh, it's great because I didn't even write one line of code." well, yeah, you didn't write one line of code, but you also left a database open and leaked 1.5 million API keys,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Yep.
a bunch of
Yep.
emails and like private, private passwords. So,
Yeah.
you also
Yep.
get that
Well,
opportunity as well.
yeah. Okay. So I immediately jumped to agents, but you're saying forget about agents even before we get to that point. Just the fact that people are generating code using LLMs, and maybe even, people who weren't writing code in the past, and so they really have like very few of the kind of instincts that you have built up over time if you've been writing code the old-fashioned way by hand by typing, putting your fingers on the keyboard. um, just that alone has already exacerbated the situation with people leaking credentials and stuff into these open source projects or wherever, putting them anywhere on the web. All right. So now let's get into some of the stuff you're working on with Bolt. So this is like spiffy for agents, or please tell me there's a better way of describing it than that. What is what's
So,
Bolt, and what's kind of the opportunity you see?
yeah. So the first thing is that obviously I was working on Spiffy with agents, and I wanted to figure out how you could trust your agent. And I felt like Spiffy was the best way of doing that. And that's the way that you could identify the agent, you register the agent, you attest the agent, you make sure it's yours, you tie it to either a machine or some other variable means you can attest it. You build it on a background platform of PKI. You use these short-lived Spiffy identities so when the agent wants to go and talk to something else. And so, there's a lot of work to do with that. And by the way, that's going to be, years of trying to make sure that we do it properly. But actually, the next question in my mind is once you can trust the agent itself, what makes that agent valuable? Now, it's valuable in itself by being used as a chat box. So you can go and talk to Claude and ask it all sorts of questions about your health or your psychology or, setting up a Kubernetes cluster. But fundamentally, I think that an AI agent is only as valuable as the data or the context or the systems that you can give it access to. And so the next thought in my mind was like, okay, once you trust your AI agent, how do you give it access to your enterprise systems and take advantage of that data or that knowledge that you already have and actually benefit from that very unique intellectual property you have in your data? And so actually what I'm doing right now with BoltMCP is less about the agent itself. It's more, once you trust the agent, how can you trust that it actually accesses the right information at the right time, the right person or the right agent gets access to that, and then the right data then gets used to answer the right question at the right time. So that's more. So it's more actually in like connecting AI to data sources than it is about fundamentally like trusting your AI agents.
Okay, so
So that
when we're talking about agents, so this is one of those terms that I think has multiple definitions based on kind of like what you're trying to promote. But in this case, it sounds like we're literally talking about here's a piece of code that's going to be running in the production environment, and what makes it agentic is like it's talking to some LLM, and so there's like some set of capabilities that it has due to that. It's accessing things in your environment, and it is and I guess it's non-deterministic in some way that makes us nervous. Is that what we mean by an agent when we're talking about like agentic identity in the enterprise context, or is it broader than that?
this is I think everyone maybe has a slightly different interpretation of it. The way that I think about it, at least, is I categorize an agent ultimately just as a machine or a workload, and I'll just before I kind of like just finish there, I'll have to put that in some kind of context. I think inside an organization, you're going to have two major types of identity that is going to be on your network. You can have humans, which are pretty well understood, and you could have employees
Certainly.
sometimes, or contractors, customers, maybe, I don't know. And then on the other side, you'll have machines. So a machine could be two types of machine: physical machine, so a laptop, a server, a mobile phone or a cell phone, or a virtual machine, which is what I would call a workload. And essentially, a workload is just a piece of software running on a physical machine somewhere. So it could be a container, a cluster, a VM, a container. And so I think of an AI agent ultimately, foundationally, as just a piece of software running on a physical machine somewhere. So I think about it foundationally as just a piece of software and just a workload. The really interesting thing to me, though, about agents is that agents can run either autonomously, fully by itself, which in my mind is just a workload, but also it can actually act on behalf of a human as well. And this is where agents become a little bit tricky or confusing. They almost need their own category because they actually take on attributes of a machine or a workload, but also of a human when they go and act on behalf of a human. So, the actual definition of an agent, I can leave to someone to go and to look at, but I think it's an LLM, it's a harness, whatever it is. But foundationally, to me, it's just a piece of software, and that piece of software sometimes can take on or delegate tasks on behalf of a human.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the way that I think about it.
Okay. And so in that world, obviously there's like the identity problem that you need to solve. And then there's and I think this is what you were getting at, there's like the access authorization, problem, which is like how once you have this agent, whatever it is that's running and it's accessing some systems, like how do you feel comfortable with that? How do you know that it's allowed,
Yes.
allowed to do the things that it's allowed
Correct.
to do and not allowed to do the things that it's not allowed to do? And that's kind of the focus. It's less is kind of the identity side of it basically the same for agents as it is for all software? Is it like, well, you slap a spiffy ID on it and like, there you go? And the hard part
Okay.
is the authorization, or is there actually something that's kind of like fundamentally distinct there?
I think it's all hard, but yeah, I think foundationally, I think of SPIFFE as solving the machine or the workload identity side of the agent. It does not solve the human side. And there's a whole different conversation going on behalf of workflows and use cases where you can essentially ensure that the agent continues to have the right intent that the human has when it asks it to do something.
Yeah.
So this is something slightly different. This is not my world, but that's more what we'd call we probably apply OAuth flows, and there are some new projects like AAuth, and obviously, maybe like scopes around OAuth and like all the various different flows that you can use to try and do something with that. It's not a solved problem, and obviously, authenticating to an agent, and that is like proving that the right thing is talking to the right agent is one thing, but then ultimately maintaining that intent and then authorizing the agent to do something with some context is a very different conversation altogether. And that is like the next level of the problem. And actually, it is something that I'm trying to think hard about right now at BoltMCP, because I do not want to compete against the identity providers. I want to take on all of that amazing work that I know is already going on, because I was closely involved with it around the workload identity and then a human on behalf of identity, and then build on top of that so I can do fine-grained context authorization with the secure access that we're giving those agents to enterprise systems. And that essentially is what I'm trying to do with BoltMCP is, it's like, how do you securely connect an AI agent to ultimately an API, because APIs already exist, they're already well understood, we've built them up over many years, and translate it into a way that an AI agent can use that access, but then control the context that agent gets access to make sure that it doesn't go off the rails and do something completely bonkers like with it. So that's really what I'm trying to focus on. It's two like major pillars of BoltMCP is like, essentially, how do you translate the API into a way that the AI can efficiently use it? And then it's like, how do you apply security, governance, identity controls to that access to make sure that it uses that context in the right way? And context, by the way, is any information that gets like converted from a data source, whether it's a database or real-time signals or a policy engine or email or a calendar, into a format that the AI agent can use to answer a particular prompt or query.
And is the answer just like put some MCP servers on it and call it a day? I mean,
I wish it was that easy.
I read.
Yeah. I think if you read about MCP, it's like the easiest thing in the world, and you could just you can just download it or convert it or use it.
Claude to write the MCP server.
Yeah, or precisely, or just use a vendor MCP server, just rely on that. What I'm seeing in the wild is that it's actually very simple to create an MCP server, and it's very simple to connect like one thing using MCP to another. To do it consistently, efficiently, token efficiently, to do it at any type of scale, and when I say scale, I'm talking like a few MCP servers, is incredibly hard. In fact, it's almost not even possible. It's that hard.
Because of like context bloat or because of something else?
Uh,
I know
yeah,
like 1% about MCP, so
yeah. Context. So yeah, so I'm the non-technical side of the partnership here. So like I don't want to maybe like, go too far over my
yeah,
skis.
sure.
But I'd say one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing, yes, is context window flooding. So the way that I would, I've heard it described is if you want an answer to something, and let's say it's a short sentence that's an answer, it'd be like you saying, okay, the answer's in that, those 10 ring binder folders over there. Everything you need is in that folder. Well, I only want an answer to that one individual like question. Yeah, but it's in those folders. Like go and say, and it'll take you so long to go and sort of find the answer in that folder that you almost get overloaded and you just don't find the answer. So actually giving the agent the exact answer at the exact right time so that the context window doesn't get flooded and everything just falls over is very, very hard. And I think the really unique thing about what Dan, my business partner, is doing is he's a hardcore context engineer, and he's very good at translating APIs translating them into a format that makes it very easy for an agent to go and pick out exactly what they need at exactly the right time. And that essentially is context engineering.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind. Let's talk about kind of the demand side of things. So, like, you've interacted with these, with these banks and stuff, and they have these kind of this expressed interest in like, wow, how do we do agentic identity and all that stuff? What is driving that on their side? Like, why do they care? Is this like I'm just trying to catch up because like if I don't have like an AI item on my roadmap, then I'm going to get yelled at, or is there like a core? Is there like a core business need that's driving that, or is it still? I don't mean to sound too pejorative about it. Is it still exploratory?
Trying to answer this question in a way that maybe doesn't sound trite, but genuinely, I think they have to do it because everyone else is doing it. Honestly, I mean, if you don't, and it ultimately ends up that AI agents enable other companies to massively outcompete or outperform, then you're
Then
essentially
you're behind.
you're essentially toast, or you're behind, or you're dead. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is a lot of it is being driven by boards and CEOs. So, and again, it's partly that fear of essentially being outpaced or out accelerated or out competed by competitors. And I think a lot of people have seen the power of AI agents, and they fundamentally know that if they can harness it and they can control it and they can deploy it in a way that is useful to them, it's going to be tremendously powerful. But no one quite knows, it feels to me, how exactly to do that at this point. So I feel like there's just a tremendous amount of experimentation around AI and AI agents. I would not say I'm seeing vast amounts of like really like well thought through production grade agentic use cases at this point. It really does feel like we're on the cusp of that, but we're all trying to figure that out right now together. I think it's quite interesting to see how CISOs are responding to this, because in my previous job, I spent a lot of time with CISOs, and essentially that a lot of them are being told you have to adopt this at all costs. Like it doesn't matter.
Which sounds crazy, right? Like,
yeah, almost like the CEOs of boards are saying, I'm willing to break a few eggs here and sort of allow you to just go off and just do it, but you have to enable it. And actually, for the first time ever, I think some of these CISOs and identity and security people understand what it means to be a salesperson with a deadline at the end of the quarter, because if they don't enable it, like they're fired, because it's become that existential. Like, I don't think that the results of like the industry show the productivity gains yet with AI agents or AI generally, but I think we can all feel and see that by done in the right way, it's going to be tremendously powerful and productive. So therefore, we have to do it, but we just haven't quite figured it out yet. And I think once we figure it out, we're going to see like a massive explosion of productivity and economic boom. But I think in the short term, at least, we're going to go through some real pain, and maybe even a bubble burst in the AI like valuations before we come back out the other side. We've been through it before with the dot-com boom, and then 2008, and even 2021 with the tech valuations. I think we'll probably see something similar, but from my standpoint at least, I'm very bullish about what's possible. It's just we need to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting to look at those dynamics because my natural instinct. I think I've talked about this in a previous episode, so apologies to listeners who don't want to hear me describe myself again. I mean, it's why I started this podcast is so that I can talk about myself, and the fact that I have guests is kind of like
But
just
at least you
vehicle.
are honest, William. That's fine.
Hey, look,
I'm
quiet down there. I'm talking
I'm
about
happy
myself.
to I'm happy to
But
indulge you. Yeah.
I, I'm the naturally kind of like skeptical person, and I think my first reaction when I hear about things is often like, okay, yeah, whatever, that sounds dumb. Especially things that have a lot of hype. Like I remember, you know, NFTs coming out, and I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, and I was right. And Bitcoin earlier in that Bitcoin came out, and I was like, oh, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And probably at that point I should have bought some Bitcoins, and I'd be, having this podcast from my yacht. But my reaction, I think, my immediate reaction to the level of hype around AI and just the kind of the observation of, as you've been saying, that like people don't really know what they're doing necessarily, but they know they have to do something. My immediate reaction is like, oh, look at these idiots. But that as soon as you go a little bit deeper, as soon as you scratch the surface there, like even if you spend just a few hours with something like Claude and like try and do something significant, it's astonishing how good it is. It's astonishing. It's not perfect. You find
No.
its flaws, but my reaction was basically, holy shit. And I think that is kind of the underlying theme here is everyone has a sense that there's something really powerful here, because like you see bits and pieces of it and you see it work really well in something like the world of for devs, their life is transformed now, right? Like and you kind of have this instinct that like, okay, this is going to change the rest of the world around it, and we don't really know how, but the one thing that we can't do is stay still and like let other people figure that out. So I actually understand that. I understand that.
Yeah.
Even though it's silly from the outset, where like people are, are basically like your job is on the line if you don't deploy AI in some form, and like you see really silly kind of outcomes from. But I understand
absolutely.
it.
I think you're. I know a lot of engineers that were still incredibly skeptical up until November, December last year when it was
right, when there was a big
4.5. So that was a big like mental breakthrough or leap, for a mental leap for a lot of engineers who were like all of a sudden like, oh my god, I can't ignore this anymore. I think for me at least, I had the benefit of working with a team and advising them, where a year earlier I had seen them create a training platform for their product. And the CEO and co-founder had vibe coded that on a weekend and put it into production on the Monday. And it worked flawlessly for a training course that they delivered. I ran a large amount of Kubernetes training with JetStack, and we built a training platform. And it took a team of 3 engineers 3 months, and then a hell of a lot of work to go and fix bugs and keep it maintained and make it working. And essentially, I saw the CEO of the company vibe code it on a weekend and put it into production the next day. That's when I knew that 100% this is going to become valuable. And like, yeah, it may have some rough edges. Yeah, it may have some security gaps and holes, but we're going to figure that out. If you can get like a multi-1,000% productivity gain, and I've been through the pain, I had to take people off like other projects and put them onto that one project to build a training platform, and he did it in one day. I mean, I saw it, and I think in some ways I was lucky enough to see that. So I spent a lot of last year trying to convince my engineering friends that they had to lean into it. And for whatever reason, I got a lot of pushback up until Opus 4.5 came out, and then all of a sudden I was like, now everyone's on the same page.
Yeah. And you and I have spent a lot of time talking about the training that you put together for JetStack and how valuable that was to the.
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah.
The company. And, to be able to reproduce, not all of that obviously, but one foundational part of that so quickly.
Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on, or something that you said, is do you remember when cloud came out originally and how everyone was cloud washing? And then Larry Ellison came out from Oracle and said, the cloud means nothing. It's just water vapor. And I just remember for like 5 years or 6 years, everyone just used that as like a reason as to why cloud shouldn't exist. And yeah, cloud was a bit of like a nebulous term. It didn't really mean anything. But for people who were in it and understood it, you couldn't be disparaging about it. It was clear that people were going to end up moving compute outside of the data because we all saw how hard it was and how expensive it was and how easy it was to sort of run out of capacity or make a mistake or have an outage. So, genuinely, could Amazon or Google or Microsoft probably do that better? And would it mean that you'd be able to reduce the capital expenditure? Yeah, it was like foundation. That was like kind of obvious. So like, I don't know. Yes, you picked NFTs as one. But actually, when you think about in our the past 15, 20 years, like a lot of the big hypey products have actually ended up coming true, albeit in a slightly different format than what we maybe expected. And I think that to me is the excitement and interest. It's like foundationally, is this going to provide value? Yes, because I can already see it. Is it providing value in enterprise? Not right now. But can I imagine a world where we can harness it in a way that we can provide value? For definite, yes. Therefore, for me, big bet in, like all in. I'm going for it.
Right. So you almost, yeah. I mean, that's a great point about cloud because there was a ton of pushback, and so it's such an interesting industry because you kind of have to be immune in some ways you have to be really discerning and discriminating because sometimes there's hype about stuff and it doesn't pan out. But sometimes there's hype and like, even though there's hype, there's something real there. And you have to be able to distinguish those two categories. Yeah. Really, really interesting. Okay. So, kind of the underlying theme of this podcast and of a lot of what you and I have been talking about, Matt, is Kubernetes. So I guess let me propose set before you set a Kubernetes questions. First of all, everything you've been talking about today, your experiences with at Venafi and CyberArk and around identity and especially the agentic stuff, is that all happening in the context of Kubernetes?
Yeah, so I got quite excited when ChatGPT came out and I started reading the ChatGPT or OpenAI blogs and I realized that all of the building, training and running of ChatGPT was on Kubernetes. So like it made me realize that, the future of the infrastructure to host, run and manage AI agents is likely going to be Kubernetes. And I think that's probably still the case. I think the thing that's maybe changing my opinion slightly is you look at the way that people consume agents. You're seeing people consume agents just via Claude code or the Salesforce agentic platform or the ServiceNow agentic platform, whether it's running on Kubernetes or not in the backend, which it probably is. It's so far abstracted away that it's more like a serverless environment. And so I kind of maybe thought that people would want to build and run their own Kubernetes or agents using Kubernetes as a foundation, and it would be a bit more visible. But actually, what I'm realizing at the moment is a lot more of the consumption, and it's very likely Kubernetes on the back end is abstracted away because they're all just part of these agentic services. I think one of the things that might change that is when tokenomics hit or sovereignty matters, or people realize that they want to keep more control of their data or their IP. I think we may end up seeing more adoption and usage of existing Kubernetes platforms to host and run agentic frameworks that are built in a more Kubernetes native way that use likely open source models. And I don't think that the pattern is going to be that dissimilar to what we've seen with productivity suites, operating systems, SaaS platforms. Cloud will have two or three or a handful of humongous players in the AI game, but then we'll see a long tail of lots of other companies, and many of those I think will be based in and around open source, and will be building on a foundation of which we've all built on over the past 11 years in cloud native community, which is obviously Kubernetes as a primitive. And so that's the way that I see it going. So right now it's all about the services, but ultimately I think in enterprise, I think we're going to see a lot more adoption of and usage of more cloud native open source type frameworks. I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's certainly my intuition as well. And I think that's good. That's good for folks like you and me who, we haven't totally wasted the past 10 years or what thinking about Kubernetes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, agreed. But then I guess if you're a CTO and you think, okay, now I want to use this open source model, or I want to use this type of agent framework, and I want to make sure that it's local, it's cheap, relatively cheap. I'm not saying cheap as in like it still does the job, but it's like it's not subsidized by some big foundation model that's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
charged spending $10 for the $1 of tokens that you actually consume, which I think will happen. It definitely
yeah.
has to happen. I mean, we're already starting to see that. Like where are you going to go inside the organization to go and stand up that agent framework and actually get your engineers to go and build it? Like you're not going to go and create some new platform to do it. You're going to go where the existing flexibility and platform comes from. And in my mind, that's what we've spent the past 10 years building, which is these internal developer platforms or Kubernetes platforms or cloud native platforms, whatever you want to call it. Like they already exist and they're perfectly suited for these agent frameworks. And I know that because OpenAI built and ChatGPT on them. So, I just think that's where you're going to go. And a lot of the innovation and building is going to get driven and run by these very smart engineers that right now have spent the past, number of years focused on containers and Kubernetes and cloud native infrastructure. But it's going to be very natural for them to then move more into these agentic frameworks and help enable this next entire wave of IT infrastructure that we're just about to start building out right now.
That's a perfect segue into the final question that I want to ask you, and then your
Okay.
grilling will be over. Thank you for your patience, by the way. Which is, what is your advice to the world of Kubernetes engineers out there who are immersed in Kubernetes, are aware that this AI kind of like, stuff is happening, but maybe don't even know where to start. Like, how do you wrap your head around the landscape and understand what you need to know, and how do you navigate in that world?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of Kubernetes engineers do when it comes to testing the next thing or dipping a toe in the water when it comes to AI is relying on the Linux Foundation, actually. So if the Linux Foundation has got an agent framework or a gateway or a project that they've blessed and they put into the foundation and they recommend it um and they sort of support it, then why not start there? And it's likely going to be Kubernetes native because it's in the CNCF or it's in the Linux Foundation. So that's what I'm seeing a number of like my friends like do. So yeah. Uh, I'm trying to think of some examples. Maybe like K agent, K gateway is one or another. I'm seeing, and then obviously we have the agentic. What do we call it now? The new
Yes, there is some new agentic
agentic.
AI
I always forget what
foundation,
it is, and obviously
MCP.
MCP has been donated. MCP's been donated there, which I think is interesting to me because I'm seeing a whole new community and ecosystem develop around that MCP now, because obviously that's now in the Linux Foundation. So I'd say that's a relatively good start, but I'd also say don't despair if you think the whole world is now looking for AI and agentic engineers, because the knowledge that you've got from building and running cloud native infrastructure is going to become very valuable as we start to build and manage and run a lot of these agentic frameworks on prem. I would say that if you look at the vast number of people that I know that want to hire, they are looking at right now, at least, for Claude Code natives. So I mean, it's pretty regular now for most of the engineers in my ecosystem or in my network to be massively Claude Code native. But I'd say there's no harm in going and embracing that and using it, because it just feels like that's where there's going to be a vast amount of demand and interest in it, and that's just going to continue. Um, God, I didn't have an answer for this, and now I'm just like rambling on for
No, great.
for minutes
I
and
think
minutes. Uh,
I think the important part of what you said, in my opinion, is you should be optimistic about this, because everything you've been learning about Kubernetes is probably going to be very applicable to whatever happens in the world of AI. And I think
yes,
that that's
yes,
a powerful
yes.
message.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say is that I think maybe trying to move your thinking up a level as well, and sort of think more about the systems and how what you're doing interacts with everything else in the organization is also going to be quite quite helpful. I am seeing a short-term demand for forward deployed engineers or FDEs, and like that translation of what the business needs to what's possible with agents and AI is incredibly like useful. And I think if you can connect what you know from being a Kubernetes engineer to what the business needs and help them to sort of shorten that feedback loop between business outcomes and the technology on a Kubernetes or like cloud native foundation, that's when you become super, super valuable. Because right now I'm getting so much demand for customers who are saying, this is my workflow, how do I document it? These are the systems I need to connect to. And then this is the knowledge that I want to give the AI instructions for. How would you build it? Where would you build it? What agent would I use? What would the framework look like? That's where I think your knowledge will become highly relevant and highly valuable. But it's not going to be valuable unless you can connect it to the business outcomes that those business people are actually looking to try and achieve. So go and try and understand more about the business and think about what you do in the context of the business outcomes that those executives or those team members are trying to achieve.
Matt, I want to thank you for joining me today on the AI Kubernetes Show. Matt is the CEO and founder of BoltMCP. You can find out more about him at boltmcp.com. And on TikTok, .io. And on TikTok at...
I can't even make anything up because we don't have a TikTok page. I'm not that cool enough. But or maybe not that young enough. Yeah. But thank you, William, for not making this entire podcast entirely about you and giving me a chance to.
It was tough. It was tough. It was tough. But yeah, we did.
All right.
All right. Hey, let's do it again sometime. This is great.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me. Cheers. Bye.